Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Poetry Thursday, and it is also October, so I wanted to focus on some spooky poetry for this Spooktober season, and I think I found a bit of an intriguing one today. Today's poem is all about ghost and the unforgiving polar landscape. I am referring to The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert Service. For those who don't know, Robert Service was an American poet who lived between the late 1800s and the mid 1900s. He was known for writing poetry, sort of travel writing, really. He would write poetry about the Alaskan landscape or the gold rush, or just writings in general about the world around him, like more than just the United States. And that was like poetry, but it was also books and short stories as well. And while he was somewhat regarded years later, in his time, many people felt that his poetry was too much verse, maybe more close to songs than necessarily poetry, and I do think you see some of that in this poem that I'm talking about today. But one could argue that music is really just lyrical poetry, but some people disagree with that, and I can see those arguments. Also, some people say that Robert Service used too many ethnic and racial slurs in his writing, which is unfortunate. But it's important that we talk about it when talking about a certain writer, various writers, rather than ignoring that. So that's why I'm mentioning that here today. So I'm very much of its time. And so without further ado, let's talk about The Cremation of Sam McGee. I will read it, do a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. The Cremation of Sam McGee. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake LaBarge I cremated Sam McGee. Now Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, though he'd often say in his homely way that he'd sooner live in hell. On a Christmas day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold, through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If your eyes we'd closed and the lashes froze, till sometimes we couldn't see, it wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed and the stars o'erhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me and Cap, says he, I'll cash in this trip, I guess, and if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request. Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a sort of moan, it's the cursed cold, and it's got right hold, till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet tain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains. A pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail. And we looked on at a streak of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee. And before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, and I hurried horror-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, you may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true, and it's up to you to cremate those last remains. Now a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart how I cursed that load. In the long, long night by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows, oh God, how I loathed the thing. And every day the quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow, and on I went, though the dogs were spent and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in, and I'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake Labarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw in a trice it was called the Alice May. And I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum. Then here, said I, with a sudden cry, is my crematorium. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared, in a blaze you seldom see. And I burrowed a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I made for a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so, and the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why, and the greasy smoke in the inky cloak went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out and they danced about ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peep inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked. Then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar, and he wore a smile you could see a mile, and he said, please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plum Tree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake Labarge I cremated Sam McGee. So that was the cremation of Sam McGee. In terms of analysis, there's a little bit worth talking about with this poem. In terms of narrative, I think it's easy to see what's going on here. The narrator is talking about a person they knew, Sam McGee, who did not like the cold and died on their trip across the Klondike, presumably the polar regions, the Arctic. They might have been delivering medicine or like doing a job of some sort. But Sam McGee died, and before he died, he made the narrator promise to keep him warm in some way, to not bury him but cremate his remains. And the narrator kept that promise, and eventually found a barge, a boat, that they buried them in the furnace of that boat, or they cremated them. And the narrator didn't like to hear it, so they left, and when they came back, they saw the apparent ghost of Sam McGee. So a big theme of this poem is that of this is just a ghost story of sorts. People who traveled westward, or people who lived in the frontier regions, would always tell stories to pass the time, and those often included ghost stories. So you can interpret this as a ghost story being passed down from one person to another, especially at the time that Robert Service was writing this, as this is what he frequently wrote about. And just talking about a scary story in the Arctic. But again, given that he also wrote travel stories, this could be another example of him sort of relaying the experience of those in the Arctic, the harsh times they lived in. And you can sort of look beyond the ghost aspect of it, but that seems important too, because it relays the harsh conditions, but it also relays the promises that two people, traveling across the landscape would give to one another. So I do think that's an interesting aspect of the poem. Now, another huge aspect of the poem is the verse. So as I had said in the introduction, a lot of people who criticized Robert Service acknowledged that he frequently wrote in verse form rather than in poetic form, as you would usually see. And you do see a little bit of that here, because there are rhymes within the line itself as well as between the lines. So in one of the verses he says, says, "Now Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam round the pole, God only knows." And you see the rhymes within the poem, or line within the line there, like Sam McGee, Tennessee, and then left his home in the South to roam. And then, like, between the lines, like, cotton blooms and blows and God only knows. And that happens throughout the poem. It can be a little bit jarring to read that. But I do think it's also very interesting in that as I'm reading it out loud, which I encourage you to do, it's always important, it does come off as a bit of The Devil Went Down to Georgia, and other sort of country music of that time. Where I think it's meant to be sung more so than just be poetry in and of itself. It counts as poetry, but if you speak it out loud, if you sing it, I think you get the full effect of the ghostly tone, the ghostly atmosphere of the poem. So I feel like that's just as important, and I think Service does a great job of sort of introducing that aspect in the poem. And it really works here because this is a ghost tale. This is a sort of legend that's being passed down, which you would see with this type of music as well. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Cremation of Sam McGee, a pretty solid poem, a lot of fun to read, and definitely something that's worth reading, outside of Spooktober, but also definitely in Spooktober if you want something chilling and whatnot. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, or if you just want to say something about my review here. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this poet or this poem if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and ghostly travels. Farewell.